Hi everyone, this is a sequel video to the first topic 7.1 on Introduction to Natural Selection. In this video we're just going to continue to talk about natural selection big ideas to really make sure that we are able to explain and write about how individuals and how species can evolve in a population over time. And so natural selection, the basic idea is always acting on those traits or phenotypic variations in populations. Really important to note, individuals do not evolve in a population, right? Populations as a whole can just change over time. And so the small differences we see in individuals in a population with each successive generation, if there is a small advantage that some individuals have in that population over others, they're the ones that have a higher fitness and are more likely to survive and reproduce. The one with those disadvantaged traits or traits that are not as helpful are more likely to die without reproducing. And so they would have a lower fitness. And depending on the environment, that can happen really fast or that can happen really slow. We're talking hundreds, thousands, millions, hundreds of millions of years. But eventually that leads to kind of like the diversity of life we see today, right? Different selective pressures and different environmental conditions that are selecting for different traits that populations are acquiring randomly through mutations and sexual reproduction. So within any population, we have this genetic variation, right? All individuals in a sexually reproducing population would have different DNA or unique DNA between each other. Sometimes that can randomly lead to different phenotypes and advantageous traits, which we call adaptations. Due to natural selection, individuals with more favorable traits are more likely to survive and reproduce. Genetic variation increases the probability a population of organisms will survive under changing conditions. And we've talked about this in the last video. If the environment changes, the phenotypes may be suited for the changed condition. They may no longer be fitted for that. And new traits will become adaptations over time that these individuals could be born with from these random mutations. So environments change and apply selective pressure to populations. So selective pressures is going to be an important idea, which is basically how quickly is the environment picking certain traits in individuals in a population. So it can be biotic, it can be abiotic factors. For example, disease, fungal diseases, bacterial diseases, viral diseases. These are kind of all biotic factors. Predation is biotic. Right? Climate, that's going to be like abiotic. If the climate is changing, is it warming up? Is the temperature or humidity changing? And then food availability, that's going to be more biotic. As we talk about availability of other animals or plants that organisms are kind of relying on for food. But as the environment or changing environment happens, this will introduce different selective pressures on that population. And so fitness is going to change as the environment is changing. It is relative to the environment that it is living in. So phenotypes can be selected for a trait, or it can be selected against by the environment as it changes. So if this is the background, we have a blue background, organism, it blends in very well. After 2 years, it stands out. The selective pressure would easily now it's standing out like a sore thumb. That would be a high selective pressure. And so that would be a reason why over very little time that they would die out. However, I think sometimes there's a misconception like, okay, as soon as the selective pressure goes up, it's like, okay, now individuals are going to be born orange. No, they might never be born with a trait that gives them an advantage in this new environment. And what do they happen? They just die and maybe will eventually go extinct. Species go extinct all the time. It's called background extinction. So individuals and populations, they don't always get what they need. They just work with what they have in their DNA, and maybe through random mutations or sexual reproduction, they can randomly acquire a trait that will be beneficial to them in that new environment. But they don't have to. There's no need or kind of like savior thing that will change their DNA to give them a good trait. Okay, and so we can see this as an example with DDT and insects. So DDT, this insecticide that farmers would spray on the crops back in the day to get rid of bugs that would eat their crops. And what we found is that, so they would spray DDT on all of these crops and kill off their bugs. However, so this was something that was used in the 1960s and 70s and was banned in 1972. And then DDT is still used to attack or kill mosquitoes, which can bring across malaria. But if you're spraying thousands and thousands of individuals with DDT, there's a chance that one of those insects are already resistant individuals, or maybe have a slight resistance to it. All of the ones that are vulnerable to DDT die off and don't reproduce. The resistant ones are the ones that are surviving and passing on their resistance to their offspring. Once there's that kind of like built-in resistance, through more mutations and sexual reproduction, maybe that resistance can get stronger. And now the populations of insects are more and more resistant to DDT from these random mutations, because each generation of populations, the weakest ones or the most vulnerable ones are the ones that are dying. And eventually what you're kind of unintentionally doing is creating this like super resistant group of insects to DDT. And now you're passing on or creating this population that is highly resistant to this insecticide and will no longer help combat this problem that you were trying to deal with. We see the same thing happen with antibiotics, where if you overuse antibiotics, you're killing off the vulnerable bacteria, and then any of them that are alive that have like a random resistance to it, however slight, are more likely to survive and pass on that resistance to the next generation. And then you're kind of creating this super bacteria that is resistant to antibiotics. And because of the selective pressure being so high for either of those examples, it doesn't take long for insects or bacteria to kind of form these resistant populations that humans would now have a very tough time dealing with. Okay. And that's kind of the basic idea of this topic. Is just this selective pressure can very quickly change the phenotypes of a population if it's a high selective pressure. Okay, so there's another example problem. Give that a shot. Let me know if you have questions, and I hope that was helpful.